Like we're not building a $500 PlayStation 5 or whatever it's going to be, right? Xbox Series X. I can't compete with those guys in graphics. I can't compete with them in technology. I can't compete with them in infrastructure. I can't compete with them in marketing, but I can compete with them in ideas.
Look, graphically, we don't try to compete or compare ourselves to Nintendo or, God forbid, Sony or Microsoft or PCs. You know, we're not, again, we don't have billions of dollars in the bank, and we, you know, we don't have the infrastructure of those people. We don't have the marketing arm. We don't have the infrastructure logistic experiences. We don't have the technology. But you know what? We can't compete in any of that stuff. But you know where we can compete? We can compete in ideas.
Mm-hmm. Guys, we're not Sony. We're not Microsoft. We're not Nintendo. I can't compete with those guys in bank account. I can't compete with them in marketing power. I can't compete with them in technology. I can't compete with them in infrastructure. I can't compete with them in world-known IPs and names that they have and own. But here's where we can compete with them. Ideas. I'm not trying to compete with Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. I'm not over here drinking my own Kool-Aid. Don't get me wrong, right? But I can't compete with those guys in technology. I can't compete with them in infrastructure. I can't compete with them in employee number of employees. I can't compete with them. You know, so many different things, right? But I tell you where we can compete with them and where we can beat them with ideas.
I can't compete with Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo in regards to power and graphics and things like that, but we can compete with them in ideas.
I'm not trying to compete with Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo. I'm not drinking my own Kool-Aid here. We don't have the infrastructure of those folks. We don't have all that. But where we can compete with them is in ideas, and we can compete with them in fun. I'm not trying to compete with Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo. You know, we don't have billions of dollars in the bank. We don't have this massive infrastructure. We don't have the type of technology and chips and the thousands of people around the globe working for, like, we don't have any of that stuff. But what we do have, we have passion, and we have ideas. We can't compete with Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo in a whole bunch of areas, but where we can compete with them is ideas. But I can't compete with those guys in graphics. I can't compete with them in infrastructure. I can't compete with them in marketing budgets. I can't compete with them with their fan base and with all they're billion-dollar companies that have been around. Nintendo's been around 100 years. People forget that. They were an old trading card company, right?
Yeah.
Microsoft, one of the biggest companies on the planet. Sony, the biggest electronics people in the world. You know, these are... You know, and so again, I can't compete with any. I'm not over here drinking my own Kool-Aid, but where we can compete with them is ideas. We can't compete with Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. We can't compete with them in wallets. You know, they're billion-dollar companies. We can't compete with them with infrastructure. They have thousands of people all over the world. We can't compete with them with their, you know, fast chips and technology and graphic cards and all the gigaflop, teraflops. We can't compete with them in that. But where we can compete with them is in ideas. I can't beat Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, Google, Apple. I can't beat them in infrastructure. I can't beat them in marketing dollars. I can't beat them in technology. But where we can beat them, or at least compete with them, is in ideas. That's where we can compete with them. We're not going to beat Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. We're not going to beat them with infrastructure. We're not going to beat them with marketing dollars. We're not going to beat them with technology. We're not. I'm not sitting over here drinking my own Kool-Aid, going, "Oh, we're going to take them out." No. But you know where we can compete with them and beat them is in ideas.